What a nice place to create something magical. Every time when you come here, all the beauty, humidity, and the artistry of this place gets through your veins into your blood and then starts to circulate in your body. And that's how magic happens, I believe.
Where in this life did you realize being a musician was a path in which you wanted to take?
When did I realize that? Huh?
Yes.
Maybe it started way later in the life after I began playing with music. In my case, it was pretty easy to begin that because my mother, she's a musician. And even though she didn't really want me to become a musician, but I grew up in a very musical environment. And I definitely had the talent, so that's why it was easy for me to dive into this environment and just start to exist there. But I realized that it is something I really want to associate my life with. Probably happened way later in life, somewhere when I turned about 13 or 14 years old, and happened in Moscow.
And what inspires you to continue that dedication?
Well, first of all, the simple answer will be that I do believe it's the only thing I can really do well. I can do many things, and I've done many things in my life, but music is only thing I see I can do really well. So that's why this choice, I hope, was the right choice since quite a young age, and remain that way till I'm present in this life.
I'm going to continue on that, but I will ask this. What was it like for you growing up in Russia and the conditions that helped you form into the person you are today?
It's a very good question, because I think this is actually one of the main parts why I am who I am, because it happens for me to be born and growing up in a very complicated country, in one of the most complicated historical periods of this country, which so-called perestroika. I was growing up. I was born before perestroika and was growing up right after the perestroika. So those times were very interesting, but also challenging, not only for kids growing in that period, but also for their parents. And most of all, I do believe it was challenging for any art and artistry in that country, in former Soviet Union and newborn Russia, because it was simply almost impossible to make any living with art in newborn Russia. That's why, as I mentioned before, my mother, who definitely could see my talent in music, but she didn't wanted me to pursue this path and to grow my career as a musician, because she simply thought there is very limited possibility to make a living out of it. That's why definitely all the challenges I had to face growing up in a very little town of Nabережные Chelny. If you look at the map of Russia, it's a very little town next to Kazan, so-called third capital of Russia, which located or southeast from Moscow, and it's that region so-called Tatarstan. So in that region they have another official language, which is Tatar language, which is a mix of Turks and some kind of Mongolian. That ethnicity coming from many wars between East and West, and the times when Genghis Khan was ruling biggest parts of that part of map. So I grew up in Tatarstan speaking both languages when I was a kid.
Mhm.
So I grew up first of all in the eastern part. I was born in South Urals in the city Magnitogorsk, which is divided. One part of the city is located in the Asia, another part in Europe. And the river, which called Ural, is exactly the continental divide, which later follows by the mountains. So you can see that for somebody who was born the Asian part, raised in very specific ethnical region, Tatarstan, speaking two languages. Later in life, at the age of 13, I came to Moscow, which considered a Russian capital, and of course, very different from the parts of Russia where I was coming from. In that times, in the 90s, there still was a lot of ethnical problems in the country, which consists of so many ethnicities. So when I lived in Tatarstan, all Tatars, like full blood, 100% Tatars, used to call me Russian and used to hate me. When I came to Moscow, and I have a lot of Asian blood in me, then so-called Russians used to hate me because I'm Tatar. So I never felt that I belonged to somewhere. So probably that's why my life grew into the path of a traveler, because I'm still trying to find the place where I belong to, and the place where I can feel home, and I know that people accept me for who I am.
And you don't feel that now anywhere?
Probably Maui is one of very few places that make me feel home. And not only because, the Hawaiian culture is so accepting. Even they still are fighting for rebellions, they want that, but they're accepted. They accepted so many cultures, and they kind of found their way to be in peace with that. And I believe, and I hope that will be growing, because definitely there are still a lot of things that are in absolute imbalance in such a beautiful place, which should be, I think, just 100% balanced.
Yes.
As the most unique place in the world, but there's still so much imbalance in Hawaii, even on Maui, where we are right now. So, and I do believe art is something that can bring some balance to human lives, and art is something that can teach people how to live in balance. And that's why it's important to start with humans while they're still very young. We need to feed them with art while they're young.
Preserve that.
Art and culture, yes.
I see. Speaking of traveling, you've been traveling for a huge portion of your life now, and I want to know where you've been that has given you the most creative and artistic inspiration for your work.
Well, pretty much every place I go, if it's a new place I haven't been before, first thing I start with discovering culture of that place. I've been in so many countries, continents, and I don't just visit them as many musicians, professional musicians do when they tour. They just, go place, they play concert, they stay for a little bit, then they leave. Maybe they will come next year, maybe in a few years, but they're just visiting. I lived in most of the places that I was the most interested about, such as Italy. I decided not just to go to study in Italy with a great teacher, great master, whose name is Giovanni Sollima. But I made my choice to stop in that country and learn the language in perfection, learn the culture of that country in perfection, travel all the country through, and I lived pretty much in every single region of that country, from the south, Sicily, to the north, even far beyond the border of that country to the Italian parts of Switzerland, such as Lugano. So I can give you example of my recent trip to Colombia, which happened just a year ago. And it was my first trip to Colombia. Unfortunately, I had just 2 weeks to spend there. But I was so excited about this trip because I'm inspired about Colombian culture, writers, their music. I love dance, and I'm so fascinated of salsa. So first thing what I did, even before I could play my first show there, I went in the salsa bar, spent just all night long just watching them dancing salsa, because they do that in the most incredible, genuine, animalistic way, I would say. You cannot almost find a single person in Colombia who doesn't know how to dance salsa. How fabulous is that? And of course, language. I'm not fluent in Spanish, but I can speak Spanish. They are pretty much related with the Italian one. So I felt so comfortable in Colombia. I loved them. I've been both in Bogota and Cali, two big cities, and I've been chased by mafia. They still do have guerrillas who basically kidnap tourists and then sell them to families or government. And if they don't get money, they start to cut pieces such as ear, finger, or head.
Oh, wow.
You know, there's still bad things happen in Colombia when you walk in the streets of kind of big shopping malls in the city, for instance, Cali. I saw a big car of a wealthy person arrives to that shop. Lady with a child exit the car, and the two big bodyguards walk everywhere around.
Wow.
All people with money live in the big gated communities with the guards. It's not like on Maui, it's just, it's a gate and cameras. No, they have real guards, armed guards, because country is not a simple one. So when you go to such countries, you have to learn those things so you can really enjoy the experience and not get into trouble. And all this stuff inspires, I think, everybody, but especially artists. I do compose music, so when I do compose music, I do compose few pieces in Colombia, and they all were inspired by the beauty of the place, the fire of the people, the danger of that place, the complexity of its culture, the Aboriginal culture of those people who lived there before the Spanish colonies came. And of course, my own perception as a traveler, as a Russian guy who came there for the first time for just 2 weeks. So I tried to combine all those experiences in a very short time to get the essence of that place and find a little box in my heart and my brain for that, keep it there and elaborate. So maybe next time when I go back, I come with deeper understanding, obviously with better knowledge of this country and their culture, but also with better understanding of those things that I saw and those things that I will see next time.
Right.
So I think that work is very important, especially what we were talking before, why art and culture is so important. Because if you learn well enough how to understand other people's culture, other countries' culture, then we can understand more their reasons that will prevent us from making worse to those people,
Right.
those countries, you know. Because most of the wars, if we look at the history, were happening because two cultures couldn't understand and come to the agreement between them. We have exactly the same thing between Ukraine and Russia right now.
Right.
So culture and learning culture is the key to the peace through understanding. That's my belief. And we artists can help with that.
Yes, it's important.
Yeah.
What's it like being a Russian immigrant in the United States today, and how does that affect you, especially having your country in the state it is right now with the war in Ukraine?
Well, first of all, I don't like word immigrant, so at first place, and I do not really consider myself immigrant because I simply spend limited amount of time here in US and still spend a lot of time back in Europe, and I try to spend as much time as I can back in Russia because, you know, my family is still there. But yes, coming to the United States and for almost over 6 years and finding home for very long periods of times was also challenging because when I came here, I came a little before Donald Trump became a president. So if you remember, there was a big thing about Russians interfering into the elections.
Mm-hmm.
So when Trump finally became a president, most of the people in this country, they were horribly upset with Russians, what they believed. So pretty much I remember in every place, in every big party, either in New York or LA, I would go and perform. They would love my music. They would accept me as a human being. But as soon as in my conversation I would say, hey, by the way, I'm from Russia, they would literally turn their back and go to another table, because I think back then it was still kind of tricky to those people and their, I believe, limited understanding of things.
Mm-hmm.
You know, propaganda and unfortunately Hollywood build out of Cold War between US and former Soviet Union, now Russia, this complete belief that these two nationalities and these two cultures are so diverse that there is basically no way for us to understand each other. And I think this is the reason of recent war that is going on between Ukraine and so between Ukraine and Russia, which obviously was very much pushed by the West and by all means. So for me, being here in such difficult period, I see big importance in that, because since I came here for the first time in the United States back in February 2016, I always felt myself as a messenger, as somebody who does speak well several languages, who did travel the world, someone who can be respectful to learn culture of this country in a depth, and to try to understand all the views of people living in this country, and through their eye to look at my country and to look at all those problems that cause that behavior that I had in the first days meeting, rich, wealthy people, both in so-called capital states, New York and California. And as a messenger, I'm trying to explain Americans more things about Russian culture, so they can understand all the consequences, what leads to what we have right now and what we had in the past century. And same thing I do when I go back to Russia. I try to speak on behalf of Americans and try to explain Russians. Yes, there are still Americans who know works of Dostoevsky and Tolstoy better than many Russians do. There are still Americans who, yes, do know the map of the globe and they do know how big is Russia. Yes, they do know. There are still some Americans, they learn geography, even though, you know, there is a word about American schools and the way they do teach geography. So I do believe music gives a very special tool to me. This tool is a stage, and through the voice of my music, through the voice of my cello, or through my own voice when I explain stories and tell things to people, I try to do that work. Try to do that work of bringing these giant countries, which both are so complex. Russia is full of small ethnicities trying to live together. The United States is the same. It's a big country with so many different ethnicities that try to live together. But these two countries are so diverse in their way of thinking, in their policy, in their history. The United States is very young compared to Russia.
Right.
This is the most problem that Americans do not expect North Americans, I would say, involved in their tryings of understanding Russians. Russian history is just very old, and so many bad things happen in the past. So when bad stuff happens in your life, in the human life, it all affects you. It stores in your soul, in your mind, and affects you psychologically. So I do believe the same things happen with the nationalities. When you have a lot of bad things that happen in your history, it reflects the human behavior, unfortunately. Same about US. US had many bad things, and in terms to understand this country, for us Russians, it's very important to learn US history in depth from the very beginning. Learn bad things that happen. And not point on them saying, oh guys, you had this, so you cannot blame us. This is not right way of speaking. You need to learn bad things to try to understand the weak points of the nation. Because through those things you see, oh, this is something that they cannot really process. If things repeatedly, continuously repeating in the history of single country, for instance, such as Russia. I don't want to talk about specific things for which I can even go in jail back in my country.
Right.
But if you don't learn those specific things, you cannot really understand people of that country.
So
I don't know if you understand what I'm talking about.
Do you feel it's just as important for Americans to study the history of Russia as well?
Absolutely.
In that same in-depth way?
I think especially now, I'm even surprised. Well, I'm not surprised. It's it's all propaganda. It's all the rules of the society. We never learn history of our enemies. And this is a very big mistake. We never learn history of those countries that we treated badly. For US, that will be Japan or Vietnam. How many Americans know the history of Japan or Vietnam after all the devastation they brought to these two countries? Same thing for Russians. Russians don't really know history and culture of many countries Russia had wars with. If we go back in the history, only was one Turkey, if I'm not mistaken, Russia had about 14 wars, only used to with one country. So, and nowadays, these two giant superpowers in the world, unfortunately still in the state of Cold War, and they better develop the education system, and Russians should learn in schools the true history of the United States, and Americans should do the same. But I'm afraid there will never be the true history. Mm-hmm. They will always invent and change things to look them worse than they are.
Right.
You know, because we are considered big enemies, unfortunately. So I'm as a messenger of peace in two countries that are biggest enemies for almost 75 years, yes, more than that, 78 years, since the end of World War II, when the Cold War began.
And you feel that art and your music is sort of a way to bring two cultures together?
With all my love and respect to art and music, I don't believe that art and music can do much, but it can help. Because as I said, culture is the key, and art and music are parts, of very important parts of the culture.
Right.
So we shall see. Future will unfold our beliefs, my friend.
Well, as I've seen you perform, playing your music in front of many people, I've seen you physically transform in sort of like a mythical way almost. And I just want to know what that's like for you, and what that headspace is like as you're performing.
A funny thing, when I was putting this hat on me, and I had a little mirror, I looked at the mirror, I said, oh gosh, you look like a gypsy. And that reminded me about my gypsy blood in me that I do have. I just recently learned that from my mother. So, as we know, all the gypsies, they are born to be best musicians in the world. And as a part gypsy, I probably got that spirit of transformation. Whenever I play my instrument, if it's cello or the piano or whatever it is, I try to get to this, animalistic animals state when you play not with your brain but with your gut. Mm-hmm. Because that's what is important to me in music as a most abstract form of art in absolute, because how much can you tell with a sound which doesn't have direct message? There is no any key, there is no word, there is no message, it's just a melody. But very simple melody, if it's well written and beautifully played, can tell you a lot. It can touch so many strings in your heart and soul. I know driving here I was listening Allegretto, the last movement from Mozart's second E-flat major piano concerto, one of the most beautiful works of classical repertoire ever written. If I'm not mistaken, it was played on radio probably by the quartet, piano quartet. But I remember in my brain immediately when I heard this melody of the last movement of that piano quartet, which is just brilliant. I immediately remember the first time I heard this music in a documentary by my friend Bruno Mont-Saint-Jean, in a documentary about the Russian Soviet pianist Sviatoslav Richter. And there is a moment when Sviatoslav Richter, with a string trio of his friends, playing this movement in a Pushkin Museum in the center of Moscow, where I used to play so many times. And it happens during Richter's festival, so-called Dekabrski Вечера, the December evenings. And when Richter plays the last time the melody of Allegretto on the piano, and he gives the melody to the strings, and he has a moment of pause, he starts to dance with his hands. And so I saw this image when I was listening to that recording of definitely absolutely different musicians, but immediately that image synchronized with the music, and I saw the most genuine performance, which I witnessed in recording, because I haven't been present in that concert which happened a few years before my birth. But I saw that musician that passed away many years ago, but through his performance and through his body language, that music by the great Mozart remained in my heart for the rest of my life. It will always enlighten me. So this is kind of, what you asked me, like, to all this body language and what we performers can give in a live event, live concert, is, I would say, enhancing, lightening something. So if music a surface, a very beautiful surface, I would say performers are the light of candle that can help you to enjoy the beauty of the surface. You still can touch it without the musician. You can see it written or recorded, but when you go to the live concert and you see this breath and energy of great performer who brings this music another time, it can be something you hear for the first time in your life. It can be something that you heard so many times being performed by many other artists. But if that particular artist brings it in his own absolutely unique, genuine way that will touch your heart in the moment of her performance, then that music goes even deeper if it could go just with listening to something, through your headphones or speakers on the radio or iTunes or Spotify. So that's why I do believe the performing arts will never die or disappear, even though it was kind of the big question when COVID happens, almost not everything, but in many countries, many things were shut down, and the performing artists were the first to suffer, to lose their jobs. And I remember in the first weeks or months of COVID, I thought, is it how the end of performing art should be? But later I understood, no, it's impossible. We still need to see magic happen.
Right.
It cannot be only and just be recorded and replayed. It has to be performed. I hope it will be this way for many more years.
Yes. And how does it feel to be the creator of magic?
The creator of magic as a composer, a performer. Yeah, it's very challenging because it still takes a lot of energy. Niccolo Paganini used to write to his friend in last stage of his life. He used to say that every live concert that I give takes at least 1 year of my life. that explains how much energy and force he was giving in just one concert. And that's how I could understand when I read a lot of memoirs of those who witnessed the live performances by Niccolo Paganini, the great Italian violin virtuoso and composer. Franz Schubert, who to my belief is one of the most thinnest artists who ever lived in this globe. When he came for the first time to the concert of Niccolo Paganini, later that night he wrote in his diary, "Tonight I finally heard voices of angels through the violin of Niccolo Paganini." So Schubert, who was a genius composer, could hear all the voices of angels. He would just imagine in his brain, but he heard them through the performance of Niccolo Paganini. So, and I think when your performance gets somebody who is so thin and particular into such highest moments of ecstasy through the sound, that means you really did incredible job to give all this energy through your sound.
Right.
And of course, it's never goes without any loss. It's something like if I know how to massage, but when you do kind of healing massage, and if you don't learn, if you don't know how to preserve your own health, it's very easy to give your health to the person you're trying to heal and to get the bad stuff from that person who is in pain into your body. So this is something what happened with performing artists performing in front of the public. But we have many listeners or watchers, and many of them are so-called vampires. They adore you, they love you, but they want to get something from you. In a good way, this is part of our job. We're givers.
Yeah.
If you're not giver, you won't be successful on stage. I mean, you can still be successful because unfortunately not that many people can understand art in that level, but you will never be properly understood if you don't cut your soul and open it up to everybody every time you go on stage. And it's very challenging, very difficult, and very dangerous work if you don't learn properly how to keep your energy. Otherwise, you will just burn.
Right.
As I believe many musicians burn that way. Most of them, they have very short lives, especially if we look at the pop or rock industry.
Right. And this is something I wanted to ask you, how you physically and emotionally maintain your work ethic, because I see you have lots of drive and you're so busy and just constantly performing and doing things, and how do you do it?
My answer is nature, my friend, and this is a gift I'm going to give you. You have to spend more time in nature, and no time is not an excuse. No matter how healthy you eat, no matter if you erase all the bad habits, just try to sleep properly, but if you do not spend enough time in nature, you're not going to make it through. At least that's what works for me, I find the biggest rebirth and the biggest energy supply when I go in a wild, deep nature. That's why probably you and I are on Maui. It's so easy and so close and such accessible. You just dive in the ocean, you play with waves, you let them kick you, smack you, almost kill you. But then you survive, you realize, oh, my neck or spinal cord is not broken yet. I'm all sore. Oh my gosh, I'm exhausted physically, but my soul is reborn. That's what I feel every time I dive in the ocean, or I go in the deep jungle, or I go on a long hike for the most sacred cold waterfall, just to dive and spend time alone with the nature, way far from humans. Of course, apart of that, yeah, we kind of need to keep the body health. And this is another key I'm gonna give you. If you wanna be a healthy artist, to be a healthy artist, your psychological state needs to be strong. To make your psychological state strong, it needs to make your body strong. Doesn't matter if you want it, if it's your understanding of things, but we need to find our own way how to make our body strong. I cannot do bodybuilding. I mean, not bodybuilding. I cannot work with a heavy weights and lift weights and pump my muscles. Even though I love the physical beauty of super strong body, but because I'm an performing artist still, I do play cello and I need the flexibility of my muscles. I cannot really work with heavy weights. Mm-hmm. But I'm finding another ways how to keep my body in strength and healthy. But again, there should be always a balance between. We all have bad habits. It's impossible to erase them all. If we erase them all, our life will become just miserable. There should be always a little room for something forbidden. And it's good. That's what brings excitement to this life. But we need to find a balance. We need to find a balance, not just to make this life longer. The scientists and all the people who do all the pharmaceuticals, they're dealing with that, I'm pretty sure. And for your and my life, humans will live longer than 100 years, easily. But it's not just about living long, it's about living life healthy and be able to use your body in 100% possible as long as possible. We don't want to live long and be weak or unhealthy. We don't want this. We don't want this life. As I used to say when I was a kid, I used to say, oh, I want to die young and healthy. Because, I would just want to live the funnest part of life. I don't want to live long enough when I start to be weak or unhealthy. I don't want to go there. So, but, life goes on. And longer you live, more you understand that you actually can and want to accomplish more things in this life, and for those things you need to be strong, you need to be physically and mentally healthy, and for that you need to learn how to use your energy properly and how to recover. Because again, as I said, if you choose art, you will be having problems with your health. There is non-healthy art, because art requires a lot of emotional energy to burn. If you choose performing art, you're double unhealthy. Because if you just don't go on stage and burn yourself in front of people, these protests make no sense. So you kind of have to burn yourself, but you better learn how to recover. Otherwise this burn will just minimize your resources, and it will cause a big damage that will cause, big healthy issues.
Just preserve the energy.
Yeah, and learn how to recover. Find your way. To somebody it's sleep. To somebody like myself, it's nature.
Right.
I exhaust myself physically, but I reborn, I get recharged mentally and emotionally.
What about when you're in like a big city or traveling? You just find nature anyways?
There are big cities where really hard to find nature, such as in New York.
Right.
You still can get in the car and drive somewhere, but it takes time and you don't have time to waste to do that. Or if you stay in downtown LA, wherever you drive, it's how long time and traffic, you don't want to do that. So that's what people developed in this thing called meditation. Just find a quiet space where you can be alone and meditate. Imagine your favorite spot. Either it's nature or something else. Imagine your favorite moment of your life that makes you happy, and just replay that experience in your brain, and that will bring endorphins and all the good elements from your body, pump them into your blood and start to circulate. Breathe. As I told you, always breathe properly. We're lucky to be on Maui. It's one of the cleanest air condition in the world when there is no volcano activity, hopefully. But yet, we don't breathe properly. As
Right.
you can see, as soon as you start to breathe properly, as soon as enough oxygen start to pump into your brain, you will see you're not used to do that. You just get dizzy.
Right.
That's something what happened with me first time after I lived over 8 years in Moscow, a very polluted, big city, polluted in all ways, with the sounds, noises, people, energy, air. And I remember when I first time got chance to go to like one preserved nature area really far Moscow, and as soon as I arrived there, as soon as I went to that forest and I did my first deep inhale, I passed out. I was lucky I had people around me, so they kind of helped me to get back, but I passed out because all of a sudden all the amount of good clean air went into my lungs and my brain, and it was overexcitement.
Right.
My brain just turned off.
Not used to it.
Yeah. So you can imagine if you learn how to do that properly, and if you learn how to feed your brain not only with all the vitamins you get through food or art, but also feed your brain with good quality oxygen and enough amount of oxygen, your productivity and your brilliance that you can use while you are productive in art. It is something that you can use as a gain. I know a lot of artists who try to use substances, drugs or anything else, pharmaceuticals, to kind of allow themselves to go beyond the brain boundaries. I'm not a fan of that, and I don't think it's the right way to do things. I do believe that if you just learn naturally and healthy how to allow your brain to go beyond those limits, you have no limit, especially as an artist. The same for scientists.
Right.
Both art and science, why they always develop together in synchrony, and why all scientists, they're so amazed by artists who can really create something in art. Because this is something scientists cannot do. They can do that thing, but in science, and when they see something absolutely genuine created by artists, musician or painter, sculptor, or dancer, or actor, they just mesmerize. Because it is something you cannot explain. No one can explain how artist does make art. What is the definition of art? That's why so many people are afraid of AI. Oh, AI gonna take lead of people. Oh, now AI can create the same art as humans. Hell no. There are certain things like this guy, the photographer, who sent the AI created a photograph to the photo competition, the Sony photo competition, and won the photo competition, even though that photograph was created by AI. But, that's why I do not believe in competitions. What I do believe is people, the mass of people. When it comes to art, there should never be all in sync, agree, is it good or is it bad? There should always be people who like it, always be people who doesn't. And only through centuries, as we can see, the real art remains. The not real art always goes. It's really hard to, that's why I think it's almost impossible to judge art created now by somebody who lives in your age. It's really hard to judge that art. It's really hard to compare that art to anything else what was created before. It's impossible.
Because of our time period?
I think so, yeah.
And what would you consider real art to be? Like your definition of that?
This is a very tough question. I'm not sure I have answer to that. I think everyone has her own true art. It's something that speaks to you. This is art. I do not believe in art per se. Many artists will hate me for that, but I do not believe in art for art. I do believe that the meaning of art is only when it's something what's made to be seen, heard, watched by other humans. And true art, to my belief, is when you create something that has a message that can help those humans who will be watching, listening, reading, experiencing that. Will be helping to understand something essential and maybe resolve their problems or questions, or maybe give them a very good example which will help them in their life path. I don't know. Something like that.
That's a good answer. If you could give any advice to your younger self or other aspiring musicians, what advice would you give? What would you say?
Musicians. I always try to inspire every single musician, doesn't matter classical, non-classical, doesn't matter which genre you are learning, or you are currently professional, or you are somebody who does it just for fun, as a hobby. I inspire everybody not just dive into the music through playing or performing, just try yourself in creating. Because it doesn't really matter if you can create something valuable or you cannot, or you believe you cannot. And maybe you just need to learn or to give this kind of emotional pump to start to do that. But to me, music is never-ending song. It's like Hawaiian culture that was only oral. They had no written language originally before, Western people came, made it happen. Hawaiians never had written culture. All their stories came from memorized hula, songs and dances, and of course music. We do not have that much left, unfortunately, memory of the real Hawaiian music. I believe it's partially disappeared through centuries because music was not written. But we do have a good preserved hula memory, and Hawaiians culture teach me how this never-ending song can teach us our history and teach us good stuff. I had one of the greatest experiences in my life, probably, when I played with my dear friend, Chinese pipa player, Lin Yu. She is originally from Beijing, China, but now she lives in Geneva, Switzerland. And we performed a couple of times in Switzerland and back in Russia. And with Lin, I played a traditional Chinese piece. There are no words, there's just music, which was composed more than 2,000 years ago. How do we know that? That piece was composed by one of the storyteller musicians who lived in the times of the certain Chinese dynasty, because that piece tells about the war of that period that happened more than 2,000 years ago. And in Chinese culture, that music still exists, even though there was no way to write it down. So they kind of preserve it from teacher to its students, from student to another student, and so on, through centuries. And this is the most incredible thing what humans can do, because we can tell stories, and music is one of, among all other languages, it is just another language. Music is a language. And if we consider music as a language that can speak to almost everybody around this globe, because the funny thing of this language, you do not really have to understand this language in matter to actually understand what this language is about. Because if there is a minor, we feel sadness. If there is a major, we feel happiness. Through music, you can speak to anybody. So my advice: consider music as a language. Never play it just to be played. Always try to tell a story. Always try to tell meaningful story. Story that's meaningful to you, and that you believe can be meaningful to those who are your listeners.
And you're communicating something.
Always. Constantly. Through communication, we can be freed from anger.
While you're in the creative process, what is it like for you internally, and how do you experience the state of creativity as you're composing and in your element?
I always find things that have very important matter to me. Even though when music is commissioned, when you're a composer, most of the times people ask you to write something specific, especially when you do music for film. But I always try to find and bring out the story, even if there is no any story. I try to find or create a story that will create a meaning for me, because even though I said music is the most abstractive art, but to me it still always tells something. And because I have to, as a composer, communicate with those who will be listening to it, I need to find a key which will help them better understand my music. Everybody understands his her own handwriting, but not everybody can understand your handwriting. So when you write something with your hands, you need to make sure that you are writing in a way that other people can read it. Same with the music. When you compose it, you have to compose it even though you're creating something absolutely unique for the first time, something hopefully with your own language and your own style, but you have always consider that you're still writing for somebody who is living now. That's why I was saying most of the greatest art needs to wait for at least a couple centuries before it starts to be rediscovered. This is something what happened with music of Johann Sebastian Bach, who was almost forgotten after his death, because the era changed and the Baroque music was not fancy and popular anymore, and Bach had few sons who were very successful composers, so his name almost was erased from history. After 300 years, he was rediscovered, and all world understood what it was a genius, who lived all his life in the same town, all his life worked in the same church, had many kids, so was very busy dad, lost many of his kids. Back then there was no antibiotics, so many kids were dying at a young age. So, and this composer still was able to create something that speaks to each of us who's capable to understand his music, even now, so many centuries past his death. Same with science, when you create something really meaningful that changes for the whole humanity of understanding, there is no way you are going to be forgotten. Same with art. We are discoverers, but we're discovering not the material things, we discover emotions. We discover emotions that help us to better understand ourselves now and those who lived many, many, many centuries before us. So it's kind of art is a mirror for you, looking at yourself, is a window for you, if you're an artist creator, to watch through this window into the future and try to send the message to the next generations, and only hope that your message will be kept and understood and well appreciated.
It's a bit like time travel, isn't it?
Yeah, we are time travelers. Absolutely.
And I like how you talk about the parallels between science and art, because it's two types of creators kind of meeting.
I'm so lucky, with my friends. Here in this property we have best production designer Dennis Gassner, we have Tom Sewell, we have many scientists on this island, one of them Gary Grimberg, 3D microscope developer, one of my friends who just left this island, Reinhard von Bolschild. I have dear friend, Russian guy who lives in Los Angeles, Victor Fanov. I have many good hearts and big brains with whom I always exchange my thoughts, ideas, by whom I get inspired, and with whom I work out all my theories as a composer. Those people are probably the first I would be happy to play my music too, and something is just created, because I know they will give me absolutely, absolutely correct, true replica, reply to what it brings, what emotion it brings from them. Something like that.
Is there any moment in your life that you reflect on that has significantly changed your perception on reality and has left a particular impact on you?
Well, I think there are so many of them. I don't want to go into details and try to remember each of them. There were unfortunately quite few moments in my life when I could lose my life, or lose my ability to function properly, my ability of being able to use my body. Those moments were very challenging. Everything that brings you to the line by crossing which you don't have way back is humbling and life-changing. When you come to that line, you will never be the same. Even though if you were lucky not to pass that line, but you just face that line and you start one more step, there is no way back. And I know a lot of people in art especially who challenge themselves to kind of bring themselves to those lines, but I don't think it's a proper thing to do. If you live your life completely, if you live your life, you will have those moments anyway. There is no way you can be protected from them, yes? But I absolutely discourage anybody to try to push boundaries, to kind of live the life at the edge, because as I said before, we need to understand our limits, and we have to learn how to understand our limits, because our body is an extremely fragile substance, and our life, it's very easy to lose this life, very easy. I saw that so many times through my dear friends who passed away recently. It's very easy to lose this life, so I think having as your goal desire to preserve this life, not by any means. You still need to have this kind of memento mori moments, knowing that anyway you're gonna die one day, Anyway, one day something will happen. You don't know what will happen, but it will happen. But don't be afraid of that. Live your life fully. And try to live each day as it's your last one. Still making plans for tomorrow. Yeah.
So you feel that having goals kind of keeps us from the line?
I do believe so, yeah. Having goals and bringing love to other people, allowing yourself to love other people, share your love with other people. Because my belief, we can truly and only enjoy this life through our people. You can never be happy alone. You can never be happy being complete egoist. There's no happiness in it. The happiness through sharing. And You have more capacity on sharing if you have gift. Because if you have gift and gift, you have more potential for sharing. That's why I think if you have any gift, just share it with others. And it will get back to you always multiplied with goodies.